Welcome to Quick Tips from Wildlife Acoustics. When Kaleidoscope does any type of batch process, it creates a number of different files on output. One of these files is called Settings.INI. What does this file do? Settings.ini contains all the information about how the control panel and viewer window were configured at the time the batch process was run. Let's see how that can be helpful. Last week I ran a cluster analysis batch process. I'd like to take another look at the results and perhaps create a simple classifier. So I'll choose Open Results from the File menu. I'll go to the Outputs folder from the cluster analysis and I'll choose the cluster.csv file. The Viewer and Results window open. There's some sort of display problem with the viewer. And if I want to rename a cluster in order to create a simple classifier, I'll go to the Results window File menu, but I don't see an option to edit the cluster name. What's going on here? What has happened is that since I ran the cluster analysis, I've done some other work in Kaleidoscope and changed some settings. If I take a look at the control panel, I see that Kaleidoscope is currently in bat analysis mode, which causes the viewer to not display the bird recording properly, and cluster analysis is disabled, which is what is stopping me from being able to rename the cluster. The solution is to close the Viewer and Results window and go to the Control Panel File menu and choose Load Settings. I'll choose the Settings.ini file that was created during the original cluster analysis. This resets all the parameters in Kaleidoscope back to where they were for the cluster analysis. Now I'll reopen the cluster analysis results, and I see that the viewer is displaying correctly, Kaleidoscope is in the correct mode, and if I go to the results window, I see I do now have the option to edit the cluster name. Okay, here's the next example. I've been learning to analyze bat calls. The viewer window is nice and large and set up with labeled buttons for manual ID. You can see I've got two buttons with multiple ID labels. In the control panel, I've got the species I want to look for checked under the Auto ID tab. But in the process of using Kaleidoscope, I've done some cluster analysis on birds and other work, so at some point I reset the factory defaults. Now when I run a new bat Auto ID analysis, or if I open the id.csv file from a previous batch process, I see that Auto ID is disabled and my classifiers are no longer selected. And in the viewer, which is the wrong size, I see all my buttons have lost their labels. I can fix this. I'll close the Viewer and Results window. I'll load the settings from the Auto ID batch. This resets all the parameters in the control panel and the viewer window to where they were when I ran the last Auto ID batch process. I'll reopen the id.csv file. Now the viewer is the right size and the button labels are back, and my classifiers have been restored. If I do a new Auto ID batch process, all my custom settings will be preserved in a new Settings.ini file. Thank you for watching.